If you want to know which cryptocurrencies or altcoins to invest in for long-term, medium-term, or short-term, or to trade in, then take a look at Tokenmetrics. Tokenmetrics uses artificial intelligence-based crypto indices, rankings, and price predictions to give you the best possible altcoins and cryptocurrencies to hodl or trade with. Use my affiliate code for a massive 10% off and 3 months free on the yearly plan. Link in the description below. All right, so Tom, where are we at with regards to Russiagate? How do you read it?
Everything's in stasis before the election. The entire world. I like watching the markets. If we do this, so if I glance away from the screen, because I've got my portfolio of assets that I cross markets that I'm watching constantly up and to the left. So I'm not accessing memory. I'm looking at investing.com. So for you body on good guys in the audience, no. What's happening here is everything's on hold. You can see it in the Dow, you can see it in gold, you can see it in, to a lesser extent, Bitcoin, which is actually really cool. You can see it in the bond markets, the currencies, everything. Everybody is trying to figure out how they're going to be positioned before this election comes out the line. And Russiagate itself is also frozen. And it came out a couple of weeks ago that Gina Haspel, this CIA director, is probably the person holding back the one piece of information that would force everything truly out into the open. And that would force the FBI's hand to actually start indicting anybody, and you'll notice that nothing's happened. So again, everything is in stasis because everybody is hoping that Donald Trump loses, and therefore all this can be swept under the rug. But it's all out there, and I think there are forces within the United States intelligence and law enforcement community supporting Trump in his way, the same way they did in 2016 by releasing the Anthony Weiner laptop stuff and all that and it kept keeping the Hillary email story alive and all of those things. And Trump doing a very good job of seeding the media narrative for everybody to go look for that stuff. That's what he does. Yes. When his dog whistles are, I need you to go look into this, this, and this. So I'm going to talk about Huma Abedin in order to get you to Anthony Weiner, to get you to the laptop, to get you to Hillary's emails. This is what Trump does, and that's where his brilliance is, right? Truly, that's where his brilliance is. And he's been doing this with Russiagate/Obamagate for 4 years now. And it's a coup. It's a slow-moving coup. It's a slow-moving coup because the people who are trying to pull off this coup remind me of the incompetent people that have been trying to stop Brexit. Like, these are not the brightest and best people in the world. I remember, Alex, you making that point about them, like, the Anna Soubries and the Chuka Amunas and whatnot in British politics. I'm like, these are marginal people at best. They don't have the skills or the wherewithal or anything else to pull this stuff off. Well, I'm watching the same, Keystone Cops routine happen over here. And Nancy Pelosi may be incredibly adept at stabbing people in the back, but that's only because somebody's holding the person down and turning their back to her so that she can put the knife in. It's just, the people on the European Commission or the Central Committee right now, the von der Leyens and the Charles Michels and all the rest of them, these are bureaucrats. They were put there because they're order takers, not order makers. And they don't have an original thought in their body. Their job is to implement policy that's been handed down to them by the people who back them. And the minute things go off script, you get Pelosi on CNN and Wolf Blitzer the other day, right? And this is what we have to, and Trump and Johnson both blow that right open because they function at a high level in this context. And so this is why Trump is going to win the election, because all we're seeing is this incessant spin and censorship and lockdown of information in order to try and keep the normies from revolting against Joe Biden and go keep pulling the lever or early voting or whatever for, what they think is something that's not real. And it's all they can do. But, lies are expensive. I say this all the time. Lies are expensive. The truth sells itself, right? So you got to spend billions of dollars to create a lie, whereas the truth just propagates like wildfire. And it passes by word of mouth. So,
and once it's out there, it's not refuted.
Right. It's not refuted. Nothing about Hunter Biden, which is tying into the election, has been refuted by Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, the DNC, all their apologists. All they're doing now is running around going, "Oh, it was all a big Russia. It was all a big Russia.
Russia."
Like always, James Clapper was on even when, I don't know if you guys saw the clip of James Clapper saying this on Aaron Burnett's show. They couldn't get Wolf Blitzer to do it because he's already off the reservation. So they got Aaron Burnett to do it, and even she was like, the minute he started to talk, she went, "Okay, so let's get back to this, right?" I mean, she was just like, "This is pathetic." Even Aaron Burnett, I mean, and she's as compromised a media figure as anybody, right? Mm-hmm. Gorgeous, but that's it. That's a role, and even she couldn't handle it at this point. And where so when the irreality gets that big, when it gets that in your face, when the people who are most exposed to all of this stuff are literally doing struggle sessions or trying to turn the whole country into one big struggle session in the Cultural Revolution, and it's not working, and people are buying guns and not bowing to their masters, they got a problem. And and all of this stuff is scary, not because these people are going to be successful in pulling all this stuff off, but because they're only going to be partially successful, and they won't stop. And the clash and the violence of those two things are going to ensure that this ends badly. And that's what's going to happen post-election, unless Trump's coattails and the red wave is big enough that there's no argument on election night. He's got 325 electoral votes, and
we're going to come to that when we cover the US election, right? Let's stick with Russiagate, right? Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm losing you.
Anything you want to say about Russia?
Oh yes, lots actually. I mean, I think first of all, it has been the investigations into Russiagate have been deliberately slow walked, and that I think is now conclusive. We started this investigation in the first half of last year, even allowing for the fact, which, as I said many times, legal time is slower, much slower than political time. 1.5 years of the Duran investigation ought by now, or at least more than a year of the Duran investigation, ought by now to have produced more publicly than it has done. The fact that it's produced nothing shows you that it is being slow walked. We've been hearing about Gina Haspel holding things back. We're hearing about the fact that apparently Mike Pompeo has also been holding things back. We also saw this incredibly cocky testimony that James Comey gave to the Senate Judiciary Committee, in which he turned up with an open shirt and all the rest. And clearly, he doesn't expect anything to happen before the election. And it's been clearly slow walked to be delayed until after the election. Notice also that Donald Trump has twice ordered the publication and declassification of all Russiagate-related documents, and on both occasions the bureaucracy has simply just ignored his orders. So we are looking at an extraordinary series of events and open disregard for the authority of the president. Nonetheless, we have now learnt through this drib and drab of heavily redacted documents certain important things over the last few weeks. And firstly, one of the things we've learnt is that this went all the way up to the White House, to Barack Obama himself. If there's any doubt about that. The second is, and this is where something I've learned, it's changed my perspective on Russiagate. When it all first began, way back in 2016, 2017, I thought to myself at that time, well, clearly these people don't like Trump, clearly they're working to remove Trump, but possibly some of the investigators, the people in the FBI and the CIA and the Justice Department who are looking into all of this, they're paranoid, and they may think that there is some kind of connection between Donald Trump and the Russians, and they're pursuing some kind of paranoid obsession. They're wrong, obviously they're wrong, but maybe they believe it at some level. Now I can say conclusively, I think we can say conclusively, that this entire investigation was phony from the start.
Yep.
They always knew that these allegations against Donald Trump were untrue. They always knew that. They knew that from the first day, right from July 2016. They were getting information that it was Hillary Clinton who ordered, or at least green-lighted this. They knew all about who Christopher Steele was. And most worrying and extraordinary of all, they were planting evidence in the media. I say evidence, they were planting stories in the media. Even FBI investigators, people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and all those, were planting stories in the media, which they were then recycling within the investigation itself as evidence to continue that investigation. In other words, they were constructing the entire Russiagate narrative, even as it was forming. So they are obstructing publication of this material, and they fabricated the investigation itself. This was never an investigation conducted in any shape or form in good faith. All of those involved, from Comey down, from Gina Haspel down, always knew that this thing was completely untrue. And that, I think, does change your perspective, because you may say to yourself, well, these are paranoid people. They were obviously manipulated by Hillary Clinton. They were obviously manipulated by the Democrats. But, paranoid people are paranoid. And maybe you can excuse them because paranoia isn't something ultimately that we can do much about, because it's a form of obsession. Well, it turns out that they were not paranoid. They knew exactly what they were doing. And that makes it, I think, a whole level more sinister. It shows you, I think, what a bad place the United States of America is now in, where quite clearly the national security state was actively and purposefully and consciously conspiring against the constitutionally elected president by fabricating a case against him in order to justify conducting an investigation against him, which they always knew had no foundation.
Yeah. This thing is a standalone complex, if you guys know what that is.
Yeah.
Which is a copycat without an original, right?
Yeah.
It's a thing that they created out of the gestalt.
Yes.
Which is a gestalt that they created out of whole cloth. This hatred of Donald Trump, calling him a Nazi, and all the rest of it. It's funny, as you said that, and I'm surprised I didn't flash on this earlier. It literally flashed in my head as you were describing it. I'm like, and this is a concept that I've been writing about on and off for a long time, and how political narratives can become their own living thing. And so now we have a narrative of Donald Trump, Putin puppet, or Donald Trump, Russian agent, that isn't real in any way, but a sincere portion of the electorate here in the United States believes it to be true, even though it's not true. And no matter how much evidence you put in front of them, they're not going to believe it. And that's the Yuri Bezimov thing. That's the former KGB the chief, or remember his title within the KGB, who defected and explained their tactics to us. The way propaganda functions is to make people doubt what they see with their own eyes, to the point where they will literally, you can show them the truth and they will reject it.
Tom,
emotionally.
Tom, that's very good, because I've had that experience talking to friends and contacts in my personal life and saying, look, there's nothing going on about that. There's nothing to the Russia collusion. It's a complete conspiracy by the security services. And I'm not a fan of Trump, but that ain't right. Security services shouldn't conspire against an elected leader. They shouldn't do that.
No.
Right.
Because it undermines democracy. And I've linked them to the declassified documents released by the DNI director.
Yeah.
And they don't say anything.
Because they don't believe anything, because all they want to believe is that which they've already convinced themselves of, and therefore that's where they are. And now they'll justify, and then the left brain takes over and says, "I'll just justify whatever. Oh, that's fake. That's obviously, where did you get that source from?" And they'll go through this whole emotionally defensive argument of this thing that they're holding on to, because now it gets worse when it's become personal. Right. The worst part about all this is that once it becomes part of a person's identity, right, his vision of himself, his version of himself. And now we have how many millions of people in the United States who feel themselves part of the hashtag resistance, fighting the evil dictator Nazi Donald Trump. And that has given them purpose. And these are people who have, to this point, been without purpose, right? So look at what's happening in the streets. And this is, and that purpose now drives identity. Identity drives everything. And you're not going to dissuade them off of this, no matter, for love nor money. And you're just creating an entire system, self-reinforcing system that is leading to exactly what we're seeing. Yeah. To a kind of cultural revolution, which is going to end which is already turned into violence. That violence is only going to spread. And those of us on the other side of this, watching this happening with horror, buying guns. And the question is, are you going to be willing to use them? And no one wants to have that conversation, and rightly so. No one should have this conversation. We should be presenting the facts. We should be trying to persuade. We should be trying to break through that programming, and it is programming.
Yes.
This is just the laughing man from the Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. It's unbelievable how prescient that anime was, and how it's playing out here in the United States today. And guys, it's the same thing over Brexit. They've done the same con job operation over Brexit. And just the last thing the European Union wants is for successful Britain to leave the European Union, thrive. So we have to destroy the economy through lockdowns over a supposed public health crisis.
Yes.
Does any of that make any sense in a rational world? Of course not.
No.
It's not even metaphorically true. It's a metaphoric lie, and metaphoric truths and stories are metaphorically true, all of them. And this story, unfortunately, now has truth to it in a way that is, that does violence to the very concept of the search for truth, which is what Alex and I and you and everybody else are in this circle are trying to do.
Paul Craig Roberts, he wrote around the time of the Ukraine impeachment, before it started, he said, if this fails, the DNC will destroy the economy in order to remove Trump.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if he knew about the pandemic or anything, but it's certainly mapped out that way. Now, I want to go back to something you said, Alexander, about the declassification.
Mm-hmm.
So the current DNI director, Ratcliffe, he has released documents. Why can't he release any more? And what are Barr and Duran doing, and why?
Right. Well, first of all, let's talk about Radcliffe. Radcliffe's not been there for very, very long. One of the great problems, by the way, this is where I think I have an advantage, because I've actually worked very, very close, if you like, to governments. I've had contact with ministers. I've had all that kind of thing. Is that, of course, if the bureaucracy doesn't do what you tell them to do, then there's very little you can actually do. You can't yourself physically go. It's not very easy to go physically hunting around the files. For one thing, you don't know where the files are. These are, vast, sprawling buildings. You can't really, search through all the emails if you don't know where all the emails are. So, and of course, let's be quite straightforward about this. Documents can be destroyed. It happens. I mean, they shouldn't be, but it happens too. So he's only been there a short time. He's got various people. He hasn't reshaped the bureaucracy around the sort of people that he can rely upon. And of course, he's also got the problem that within the bureaucracy, there are teams of lawyers. Now, these lawyers are not people who will necessarily impartially and objectively administer the law, who will look at a document in front of them and they will say, well, this document clearly doesn't pose any kind of national security threat if it's published, so the classification is wrong. We can therefore safely declassify, and it's in the public interest that we should. These lawyers are there to make sure that classification is expanded to the greatest possible extent. And if Radcliffe says to them, well, look, I can't really believe this doesn't make any kind of sense to me, what you will then get is a phalanx of legal lawyers and legal opinions pouring at him, saying, well, if you do this, you're breaching, regulation 437, bracket 1, bracket C, which says X, Y, Z. And again, unless you are a very strong-minded person, unless you've got people within the bureaucracy who will support you, unless you are absolutely confident that the person above you is both engaged in this bureaucratic battle and will back you to the hilt, and unless you have your own reliable legal counsel, it is very difficult to prevail against all of this. My father, who was even more heavily involved in bureaucracies than I was, both at EU level and Greek level. And the Greek bureaucracy, by the way, is another level of complexity still. He once said to me, a bureaucracy is an unsentimental monster. It has no feeling. And it's like the Roman army that you see coming over the hill in Spartacus. You remember the scene in Spartacus? It just comes at you wave after wave after wave. It takes huge will and resources and strength of purpose to break it down and to see it through. That's why if I have to say so, Boris Johnson brought in Dominic Cummings because he knows that Dominic Cummings is the kind of person who might be able to blow it up, if you like, from below. But it takes time. And Radcliffe has only been there for a relatively short time. Donald Trump has been there for 4 years, and he's not by any means a weak person. But he has found, you can pull the levers, and unless you've got people on the other end, who are operating the machine for you, those levers won't work. It took Putin, who is a very forceful person, around 4 years to bend the bureaucracy in Russia to his will. I mean, he needed to get to put his own people in charge, and then eventually it was only after about 4 years that he was able to get Mikhail Hodorkovsky arrested, even though Mikhail Hodorkovsky was a criminal in plain sight. So these things are never easy. But there is something very important to understand about Russiagate. Russiagate is itself a cover-up. The reason they launched these investigations of Donald Trump is because they were always afraid that Donald Trump was going to find something. As I said, I stress this because we now know that they never believed at any time that he was any sort of Russian agent. They were trying to find a reason to remove him. Why were they trying to remove him? Not just, I think, because they were afraid that he was going to change policies, but also because there are all sorts of things that had been going on that they were very afraid a new president and his team might find out. So Russiagate was itself a cover-up to try to prevent Trump finding out those things. And coming down to Barr Durham and all that, well, I don't know about what Barr and Durham's own motives and intentions are. Maybe they're running into the same bureaucratic obstacles that I've just been talking about. Durham is a very secretive man. I suspect if he's so secretive, he probably is a sign that he's not actually terribly enthusiastic about all of this. I mean, I don't know much about him, but it's more likely the kind of special or counsel or attorney who's more likely to make an impact in this is one who goes out, who talks to the newspapers, who talks to Fox, who calls for support and, who criticizes and prods and pushes. And Durham hasn't been doing that. And, I do wonder why, actually. But, the fact that Barr and Durham haven't succeeded in advancing on this faster is that we see that Russiagate is now also being covered up. So we have a cover-up of the cover-up, if you like. And it does make you wonder, what is the truth? What is the thing that was going on that they are so frantic about trying to cover up? There must be lots of very, very dark things that have been going on within the intestines, if you like, of the national security bureaucracy and of the US government, and in which no doubt presidents, and I'm thinking of Barack Obama here specifically, were deeply implicated in themselves, which they do not want the American people to know about.
Right. Well, just before I come to you, Tom, so what comes to mind? Bill Clinton, Epstein, Hunter Biden's laptop, the contents of that, plus who knows what else, and we'll come to, and Bill Gates and visiting Epstein's island. We'll come to all of that, right? Because we're going to cover all that stuff and Hunter Biden, the election in the subsequent election. But Tom, anything you want to say about what Alexander said?
All I was going to say is I was going to start the transition into the election itself, because if you listen to what Alex has said, he's building layer upon layer upon layer of cover-up. Well, guess what? Let's back up. Let's go back to 2016. What's the ultimate cover-up? We're running two people who are deeply involved in all of these cover-ups and all of these things as leaders of the Democrat and Republican Party. The elections themselves are cover-ups and the perpetuation of the whitewashing of what's being done bureaucratically and technocratically behind the scenes, right? Once you start to see it this way, how do you see it any other way? And Donald Trump just being a node of chaos and refusing to back down is enough to force the change that, as long as he does that, he's that stone in the middle of the pond, and the ripples come out, and the ripples go out, and eventually, though, those waves come back. They reach the edge of the pond, and they come back, and so there's this constant back and forth and ebb and flow. Alex is exactly right about the bureaucracy. A lot of people in my, in our camp on the side of things going, well, come on, man, Trump's a neocon. I see great people and I'll name names like Mike Shedlock and David Stockman and others who refuse to get off their libertarian high horse and see the reality for what it is, which is that Trump can only do so much. Let's a perfect example of this. We have a 52-47 to 1 or whatever it is in majority in the Senate. You've got openly 3 senators in Republican garb that are Democrats, Murkowski, Collins, and Romney, who will do anything to scuttle Trump, what Trump wants. So with that said, how do you get anybody other than Gina Haspel as CIA director? Even if Trump wants somebody else, how do you get, what's the list that Trump has handed of acceptable candidates for CIA director if he wants to move out Rex Tillerson as from state and move Pompeo up? Because Pompeo, he's at least marked, that is, he feels is at least loyal to him, if not incompetent, right? Like, what do you do? Like, this is the reality, because he's not a king and he's not a prime minister. It's very hard for people to understand this, especially outsiders. I got into it with Caitlin Johnston on Twitter yesterday for saying this exact thing. Like, she's not a king. And then she went off on, me getting angry with her 6 months ago, and well, that's a different story. But the point was valid, and she never addressed it because she never does, which is that he's not a king. He's subordinate to the Senate. The Senate ultimately picks the cabinet. The Senate ultimately picks the Supreme Court. That's where the power is. That system is set up on purpose this way. We have separation of powers. This is when they like the Constitution. They hate the Constitution at every other moment of the day because it limits their ability to work and operate in the dark. But they only like the Constitution whenever they can use it as a bludgeon to stop anybody from figuring out what in the hell they are actually doing. And so that's the reality. So when it's no surprise that we now find out that Gina Haspel is the one stopping the linchpin bits of information that would tie all of Stefan Halper and the FISA warrants and Obama. And it's no surprise. You've got people on both sides of the aisle implicated in this. It all goes back to the Maidan coup in Ukraine and John McCain, and Nancy Pelosi is involved in that, and Mitt Romney's dirty in this, and they're all dirty. I've been saying this about Ukraine forever. Ukraine Gate is everything. They had to try and impeach Trump for Joe Biden's crimes, because Joe Biden's crimes are all of their crimes. And this is Zelensky 101. Accuse your opponent of that which you're actually doing to throw shade on him. Right? Look, the Russiagate thing, do you know why Hillary moved to the Russiagate thing? It's a classic example. I remember being back in 2016, chatting on the phone with my politically astute friend, and he's like, you watch, he just went to Uranium One and brought up the Russians. Within 48 hours, she's going to accuse him of being a Russian agent. And literally, the next time she did a stump speech or they interacted in any way, manner, shape, or form, she went in the media, she implicated him as a Russian agent, because she doesn't understand any other tactic other than accuse them of that which you're guilty of to stop his attack on her. That's the way she thinks. That's the way they operate. And it's that simple. So when you get into the election narratives, all of this stuff plays itself out. All of this stuff replicates itself over and over and over again. I say it all the time. These people are smart, but they're not very clever, because they only have one thing. They have one gig. Attack that guy. Attack him for what I'm doing. And then call him a pedophile or a sexual deviant or a drug addict. Nuts and sauce. That's it. That's like all they ever do, over and over and over again. And they do it because they know they can hit people in their disgust circuit. They can hit people in where they live, in the core of their identity, and get them to react emotionally to it and not to react with their reason. And go, that's nonsense. That doesn't make any sense. Because we're not allowed to do that. We have to be proof-flinging monkeys chattering at each other on Twitter. And so that's the election. And that's why Joe Biden has any chance at all of winning one electoral vote in this election. Because by any rational metric, if you just stop and think about everything and you look at the two candidates and you go, who do I get to pick? The guy who beat COVID in 3 days, or the guy who can't remember his own name? Who's more qualified for the job? Choose. Take everything out of the equation. And Biden wouldn't get a vote under that circumstance.
Very good point. And we're going to move on to talk about the US election in the next section. But I have asked people who say that they're for Biden, And I asked them why, and nobody's ever said actually what it is really that's so captivating about him, other than Orange Man Bad. That's pretty much it. Orange Man Bad.
Yes.
Okay.